today? Oh,
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this for us. Of course, February is Black History Month and March is Women's History Month. So we wanted to reach out to a Black woman in the DEI field, and your name came up. So thank you so much for doing this and sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. Can you start out by telling us who you are, who is Leslie, what you do, and why this work is important to you?
Sure. Leslie Bleichner, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm originally from a small town in Oklahoma, and so grew up right outside of Tulsa. And but I'm an Army brat, and so I've lived all around the world. But I was born in Oklahoma. I went to high school in Oklahoma, so I claim that because when you move every 2 years, you you look for something to claim.
Mhm, mhm.
And my family is from Oklahoma and Texas, and so we have deep roots there. Uh, and I am a wife. I'm a mom, and Iowa has grown on me. I went to college here, and I'm currently working at my alma mater of Cornell College, where I am the Assistant Chief Diversity Officer for Community Training, Education, and Belonging. Very long title. It does all fit on my business card. Um, but I love Cornell and I love Iowa for that's directly related to like why this work is important to me. Like, Iowa gets a bad rap about being like flyover country and, just sort of the middle of nowhere and like what happens here. A lot of my, excuse me, friends that I've picked up along the way from around the world are like, you live where? What is there to do there? But what I love about that is one, there's something about it, it's quaint, it's quiet, it's a great place to raise a family. But really, we're in the middle of everything as opposed to in the middle of nowhere. And I think that we are at a great nexus of people from all walks of life, all journeys, in our own individual ways and also in collective ways, which I think is really, really cool. I'm a history nerd, and so I love like reading about particularly like US history, even though we're super young, right? But like looking at migration patterns and just how Iowa even became to be a state and our rich history of abolition and our strong roots in education and that kind of stuff. And we really are again in the middle of everything. I think what leads me and Grinnell is also like uniquely situated in that too. We have students from all 50 states and from I think 37 different countries. And so in this random little small town of 10,000, we have really global representation. And so to be able to do that every day is really, really cool. So having lived all over the world, in this body, I have a lot of interesting experiences. And so to be able to share that and learn from others as well, I think is what keeps me in this work. But I feel especially blessed to be able to do that right in the middle of everything.
Yeah. So that's really interesting that you say that, Leslie. Can you tell me more about what you mean by Iowa being in the middle of everything? Because, of course, we are all familiar with being part of like flyover country, and there's not a whole lot to do here, and it's just corn and soybean fields. So, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, like there's a funny shirt that we partnered with Raygun actually. It says Grinnell, uh, smack in the middle between like New York and LA. And so like we use that as like a joke of well, one, we are like physically located and like truly are like in the center of so many things. But
Mhm.
I think Iowa is really pivotal in a lot of ways, like the history of the caucus and how like the nation really kind of looks to us to sort of kick off our presidential pickings, and in the unique way that we do it, right? Like most other states have primaries, and we really do gather like shoulder to shoulder with our neighbors and like physically like show like I'm with him or I'm with
Mhm.
her or whoever,
Uh-huh.
which I think is really unique. But again, I think when you look at the history of Iowa and look at our migration patterns, and even our current migration patterns, some of the immigrant groups that are choosing to settle here. Marshalltown isn't far up the road, and there's a significant Latinx population there that they've called home. The history of some historic Black towns that are in Iowa, even Grinnell. The history of J.B. Grinnell settling and his band of abolitionist, ministers that, so many of our small liberal arts colleges around the state. And so I think we have a lot of these like really national, we've been pioneers. That's our mascot, which is like a weird colonialism. I digress. But we're forerunners. There, I'll say it that way. Iowa is forerunners in a lot of ways. Um, Around like setting the tone for the country, and I think that's neat, and we do that in like the Midwest nice kind of way. Like it's not weird to say hi to your neighbor, it's not weird to have a conversation at checkout, at Fairway. It And you can, talk about just about anything, and I think that we are uniquely positioned to have conversations across difference in that way, as opposed to starting from like what makes us different or what makes us weird or whatever. Like across the state, we have that sense of neighborliness. And I
Hmm.
think that's a really beautiful way to open the door to really get to know one another so that we can be better neighbors ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. So, so you work in DEI, and in a previous conversation, you did mention that you have done DEI work for a while. So, what does DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, mean to you personally and also professionally? And further, why is that important?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I mentioned in my last comment, like I've been on this earth for 38 years in this body, and so I'm confronted with issues of diversity, equity, inclusion every day, just by the history of colonization, slavery, uh, not toxic masculinity, like paternalism, like patriarchy. That's the word. With women like not getting voting rights until the 20th century, like again the history of slavery and like the voting rights. Like again, being in this body, and again being a history buff, I can't go throughout my day to day without knowing, whose shoulders I stand on, who has paved the way for us to have the freedoms that we do. Again, I come from a long military tradition as well, and so even connecting to the various folks that have, what we call freedom and what we fight for freedom. That lives with me on a very personal level, like through family connections. But again, just being a citizen of this nation, and wanting it to be the best place. Like we're the greatest nation on earth, and so um, that personal and professional connection has always really, really been there. But just because I have the lived experience doesn't mean that I, know all the things about it. And so I've always been curious. Again, I think I attribute that to growing up all around the world, being curious about other folks, food, music, different things that make up our culture, but just also what makes people tick, what makes societies tick. And so because of that personal passion, that's why I pursued it professionally. And so I think it's important to note that all of my DEI experience has been in the world of education, because I think that like I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I think that to be the most effective in this work is to maintain that humility that I don't know everything and that I'm always curious and like wanting to learn. Because if I model that, then the folks that I'm with can feel more comfortable to step into that learner mode themselves. And so I started off my career as a high school history and math teacher, and work with my kids, and particularly in my history classes, not so much in AP Calc, but asking those questions and encouraging them to be curious and critical about what we know and love about ourselves, our country, our world, and then what we want to change in it. And then transitioning into college access, and really working with first generation low income students to open the doors to go to college and see how not only that can impact them, but their families, their communities, their world. and again, learning from one another all along the way. Like learning has to be at the center, and this is just my own personal philosophy, but learning has to be at the center of this work, because if we don't remain humble, I think our ears get closed and our ability to learn and even be, gain expertise is diminished. And so, being working with, kids just wanting to go to college to now, being at the institutional level and looking at policies in order for folks to be their best selves and their most authentic selves at work here that we do so that we can model that to our students, but also model that to each other, is really important. And so I think to distill it all down, it's a mantra I picked up from a mentor of mine, actually here from Grinnell. But I've said this, that I think my purpose in life is twofold, is to put people in positions to make powerful decisions about their future and to create an environment where they can be 100% their authentic selves 100% of the time. And so to be able to do that in a learning environment where it's really centered on just getting to know people, which helps me get to know myself in different ways, I think is really cool, and again also connects to the personal and professional.
Very good, very good. You brought up a lot of very interesting points there. So you mentioned a couple of times living your life in your body and having some experiences that others may not have. So can you share some of that, some experiences that you may have had that others may not have, and how that has impacted like your day-to-day life?
Sure. Yeah. So I always like to start with positive experiences. I think that uh, my family's from the South, and I think that Black folks specifically, and Black women especially, I think are really adept at doing this. But at just building community in really really unique ways, right? And so one of the one of the funniest things. So my freshman year at Grinnell, I lived in a quad, so it was me and three other women, and I was the only person of color. I lived with three white girls, and I brought them all home for Thanksgiving. And one, they were all like, "I've never seen so much food in my whole life," and I was just like, "Oh, this is just like day one. Like, let's get in it." And like, and they were so like complimentary, but it was so cool to see not only my mom but my grandma, and my aunts, just like really just show out like Southern hospitality, but like in a way that like people had never seen before. And so we got to tell, well, they told a lot of embarrassing stories about me, but like, because they
This
were
family does.
my college roommates, like let's spill the tea on Leslie. But I think like and afterwards, like on our drive back up to Iowa, like we talked about, and they were like, we never get together with our extended family, or not in this scale, and you do this every holiday, like, and so I think there's some really cool, unique traditions that are unique to like the African diaspora. Like family is just it's a lot of what we have, and especially because of the legacy of slavery, so many of our familial ties were broken historically, and that can kind of help like make you feel rootless and sort of like, where do I belong, what do I do? And so we show our resilience in ways to cling to that and create like roots and community, um, where often it can't be found, right? And so I think those are transferable. I'm not saying that that's solely unique to Black folks, but I think when you look at histories and you look at movements, but then also just like on the day to day, just the way that we can cultivate community and rally together, it is really cool. And it's something that, again, I've lived in a lot of different environments, and that's something unique to, I think, being a Black woman. Stacey Abrams is one of my personal heroes, sheroes, and just thinking about what she's done in Atlanta, but in Georgia, collectively around voting, and she says all the time, like, it doesn't matter who you vote for, I just want you to vote. Like, let's like honor that legacy. Let's,
Mhm.
people fought really really hard, and for people of color, for the indigent, for women, again, all those things. And Black women just have a tendency to have that je ne sais quoi, as I like to say, in order to be able to do that. um, and so I think that's a way. that's what I think, particularly around Black women, that's our kind of special sauce. But I've also experienced um, really, really adverse things that have also like shaped how I view the world. Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been followed around in a store. Less so now because like I'm an adult and I have a kid, and they're like, oh, okay, she's just trying to buy like lunch meat. Like,
Right.
but but I even think about now that I am a parent, like how I will raise my son around don't have your hands in your pockets in the store, right? Or always ask for a receipt, always put your stuff in a bag. Like they're just because of those adverse encounters that I've had, like they're just things that like I've adopted as standard and normal now, and we'll pass that on to my kids. And it breaks my heart a little bit that I have to do that. But if it's gonna keep my son safe and around to be able to be the bright light that he is, then so be it. And so yeah, you take the good with the bad, and you don't overgeneralize. Like I don't want to, one bad apple spoils the bunch. Like I don't adhere to that philosophy. I think that folks make choices, and we all have free will. And I hope to be viewed as individually as somebody else would, um, as I would view someone else. That's the word I was trying to go
Mhm.
for. But again, like there are patterns, and we've all experienced it. Like so, um, I take those things in order to govern myself appropriately, and I think it's also important to not lose hope around like the goodness of humanity and that we're all just trying to figure this thing called life together.
Mhm.
It was super rambly. I hope that answered your question.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I love it. You bring up so many good points as you're talking, so I appreciate it. I know, I know it does feel like rambling, but it is all good information. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Um, so you brought up Stacey Abrams. She does incredible work. Another Black woman that I admire is excuse me, Kimberly Crenshaw.
Oh yeah.
That she kind of coined the term intersectionality. So intersectionality being, there was I'm sure you know it much better than I do, but there was I think it was in the, I'm going to butcher it, 60s maybe, that there was a woman that was applying to a car manufacturer,
Mhm.
and she was turned down. She was rejected as an applicant because they were hiring Black Americans on the line. They were hiring Black men on the line and white women as clerks. And so she filed two different discrimination cases as a Black woman, or as a Black person and a woman. And the judge turned her down and said they're hiring Black Americans and they're hiring women. So Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, and it's used today. So and it's not just specific to Black women, of course, but Black women definitely experience that frequently. So can you kind of give your thoughts and insights on that and how that operates for you?
Sure. Yeah. I think that well, I'll start off with a wish. I wish that like terms like intersectionality like haven't become so like politically loaded because it's something that's also really universal.
Mhm.
Nobody is like a monolith. Like I'm not just one thing. Like I could rattle off like six identities. I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm an aunt, I'm a professional, I'm college educated, I'm Black, like you know what? Like we all have these layers to ourselves,
Mhm.
and those layers are constantly in conversation with one another,
Mhm.
and in conversation with others as we collide, right? So you have these
Mhm.
internal collisions or intersections that are paired with like external. And so I think just like normalizing that and like naming that, I think lowers the barrier to just like greater understanding. Um, but yeah, I'll so I mean, yeah, it's like it's Black History Month, Women's History Month, so like those intersections of being Black and a woman like can sometimes create a little bit of a slippery slope. And that's and in those moments, it's because I think one identity is in competition with another, and so like you have to decide like what's going to be elevated and what's going to be diminished. When a lot of times we just want to exist, right? Like we're just, as I said, we're just out here trying to live. And so, when I walk into a room, um, a leadership room, for example, not so much at the case here, but at my last institution, I was the only woman on the board of our senior leadership team, and I was not the only person of color, which was interesting. And so, but I remember having certain conversations where having to assert myself, just to make sure that my point was heard, or that like who I was advocating, the students that I was advocating for in that scenario. Um, and some of the feedback I got, sometimes it was because, well, women are shrill and blah, blah, blah. So there's that piece. And then sometimes it was, well, you're so animated and, you know, we don't want you to be too loud and this and other thing. And so, those two aspects and stereotypes about my identity were often, in conflict with one another. And again, that's really when somebody is trying to compartmentalize like a part of me, where I was like, no, I'm both, and a lot of other things that we're not even talking about, right? Let's not talk about the fact that I'm disabled, or let's not talk about the fact that, I'm privileged in a lot of ways as well, that I'm even in this room because of my training and education. Um,
Mhm.
but I digress. But yeah, it can be really frustrating to sort of be distilled down to just like one small part. I mean, it's a significant part. I'm very proud to be a woman, very proud to be Black, very proud to, have all the other identities that I share. And so I don't want to diminish that, but to distill me down to only that, you're missing out on so much more of me and my story and my history. So yeah, it can be really tricky. And as I get older and bolder, I guess, it's been, when I do get feedback in those ways, like I lean into, again, being a learner and being curious, be like, hey, like, can you tell me more about like what you mean by that and like where you're coming from? Um, and then listening first, and then offering, well, like, well, here's who I am and this is what I'm about, and this is unique to me. And because sometimes somebody's just having a bad day,
Mhm.
and we lean on what we're comfortable with, and we have learning to do, or somebody may really have some bias, and when you get an opportunity to listen and tell your story, like they can be like, oh, I will do better next time. Like
Mhm.
it's just one of those things. So yeah, it can be tough. Um, but I think that even in the toughness, there's celebration to be had, right? Like there are, because of the identities that I do have and how they show up simultaneously in the various rooms that I'm in, I have a unique perspective and can advocate for the people around me because of my perspective. So if I am, in a room full of dudes, we love our brother counterparts, but like because of where my positionality is, I can see things that will advocate better for the whole,
Mhm.
um, and be nuanced in that, right? Like, so yes, I can advocate for women, but then like, how can I also advocate for people of color? How can I also advocate for people who are disabled? And like to have that insight, I have to celebrate the fact that I have those intersecting identities, right? And that's an asset, not a liability. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I think it's a fascinating concept. And I think, again, the barrier to accessing that is just normalizing the fact that we are all multifaceted. And if we just brought that to the forefront and celebrated that, I think that we would see one another, for who we are in 3D, which I think is
Mhm.
really important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think I've had a lot of conversations recently that people tend to or try to focus on what makes them similar or have sharing those commonalities with others just to help build those relationships. But then that's kind of that is minimizing the differences also, which can be scary at first if you're not familiar, especially. But those differences are what really makes diversity, the D in DEI, so beautiful and so productive. So, especially in not just our social groups, but also our professional and educational groups as well. So, thank you so much for elaborating. So, what would you say are some do's and don'ts for those that haven't had exposure to backgrounds different than their own?
Sure. I think starting off first, like hopping on Al Gore's internet and doing a good old Google search. Like again, like just like lean into like your curiosity is a good thing. And if you don't know where to start, Google will help you. And so, and it won't judge you, right? Like it
Right.
will be like that's the stupidest thing ever. Like what? It'll just produce results. And um, so yeah, like just it's starting just like curious about you know black women or we mentioned Stacey Abrams, like again, like just hearing things in the news or just like and then just going to the internet and start. I think it's a beautiful place to start. Like
Hmm.
we walk around with a computer in our pocket all the time, and so just like any time to learn about a historical figure, learn about a contemporary figure, um learn more about like your town, and how it got to be, because you'll learn that other than like our indigenous friends, like we came from somewhere else, and so
Hmm. Hmm.
we weren't always here. And so understanding those different patterns can introduce you to different figures, can introduce you to different times, and just again, so that's very practically start with Google. Um, and because oftentimes, like even when you don't know where to start, you can say like interesting movies to watch or interesting
Hmm.
books to read or
Hmm.
people to follow on Twitter or whatever. Yeah, I think is really great. I also think that starting off, like if you do like happen to have that encounter, like just starting off recognizing that like that person is a person, like just starting there, just being like,
Right.
hey, how are you? Like, and building that common humanity and that trust.
Hmm.
I think oftentimes we get obsessed with not wanting to make a mistake or not wanting to hurt somebody,
Hmm.
and that we forget to be ourselves.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, because and you're like, oh, I don't want to ask this wrong. But I think if we start just by building some just relationships, like how
Hmm.
are you? How you doing? Like
Hmm.
how's your day going? What led you to work here? Or how long has your family been here? Like you just start to build rapport and get to know
Hmm.
one another's stories.
Hmm.
Um, and then you can kind of get into those nitty gritty. And that also opens the door for you to ask a question that, like, if I don't know you from Jack Sprat,
Hmm.
like, no, I'm not going to tell you about my hair. Like,
Right.
right? Like if we don't know one another, like I'm not going to like share my like curl secrets. Like, right? And so I think just like starting foundationally, again, being neighborly, which
Yeah.
no ones are great at.
Yeah.
Just starting there and like really from an authentic place. People can tell when you're being fake or when you're trying just to like get something from them or sell them
Hmm.
something. Like we're perceptive in that regard. And so if you really do want to make a genuine effort to expand your horizons, that will come through in your effort. And we can assume positive intent for one another on both ends. I think it
Hmm.
is really important.
Hmm.
Um, I would say, and this is my last thing. I will, if you haven't had, again, the internet is a wonderful thing, but I think another thing that's really important is to go somewhere you haven't ever been before.
Hmm.
Um, my passport's always full. Like I like COVID was real rough for me because I was like, I can't. I need to be on a plane. Like, um, But like, even if it's, going to eat at a restaurant in the next town over, like, it doesn't have to be these grand gestures. Like, you don't have to go spend a week in Thailand.
Mhm.
But you can, get on Yelp and see like what's a great like Thai place in Des Moines to check out, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think we get comfortable and we get siloed, and the world is so big, and being in the middle of everything, we actually have access to a ton of stuff. And so
Mhm.
um starting off with food is always great, like a way to my heart is through my stomach. So
Mhm.
um going to a restaurant, but just like, again, going to the next town over, being curious, going back to
Mhm.
the library, reading a book, picking
I
up,
know.
a name that you may not be able to pronounce. Like, I do that all the
Mhm.
time. I'm like, I don't know how to say this author's name, but this book was
Mhm.
beautiful. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like, if starting off in like new areas feels overwhelming, like, start with the people that you do know and that you
Mhm.
do have that relationship with and you do trust, and say,
Mhm.
like, Ashton, like, I saw this, I saw you interviewed Leslie and she mentioned like all these like crazy names. Like, what do you think? Where do you think I should start? Like, me, you know what I'm
Mhm.
about, you know what I'm interested in. Like,
Mhm.
um, yeah, like, if you do have questions about like hair and stuff, like, hair, oh, you know what, Madam CJ Walker is like something, and Octavia Spencer was in this movie about it, and so that's a good way to start. And like, again, like,
Mhm.
use your network and use the knowledge of the people that are around. And then a couple of don'ts that I'll say is, that, well, I won't use that because my mom might watch this, but like the saying is like, what happens when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me.
Mhm.
Like, making assumptions, like,
Mhm.
just looking at me, you would never know that I'm trilingual, or that I lived all over the world, or that my husband's white, or like, I mean, there again, just never judge a book by its cover. There's all those
Right.
adages. I'm Southern at heart, so those are always going to come out. But
Yeah.
I think just like not making those assumptions, and again, really leaning into those conversations with genuine curiosity, but also
Mhm.
humility too. Like, that goes both ways, that like you might learn something about somebody else that
Mhm.
may in turn like help you learn something about yourself. um,
Mhm.
and just being open to that. And then another don't I will say is, uh, well, I'll say it this way: intentions and impact are two different things. And while we always want to assume positive intent, like, I don't think anybody, I mean, I know that there are people out there that are just mean, but
Mhm.
99 times out of 100, like, we mean well. We're trying to, again, we're just out here lifing. And so I'm
Mhm.
assuming that. But if somebody tells you that like what you've said or what you've asked or whatever like hurts them and offends them, like, listen to them. Because you might have had the best intentions, and that's good. Like,
Mhm.
even when we are hurt, like, we can recognize somebody's good intentions, but that
Mhm.
doesn't diminish the impact that it's having. And so if somebody feels comfortable enough to let you know in the ways that you've hurt them,
Mhm.
like, hear that and embrace that, because that's actually a sign of care.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, don't get hung up on, like, we all screw up. I make mistakes
Right.
every day, all day, twice on Sunday.
Mhm.
And so you make mistakes, you make amends, and you move forward, and use it as a learning opportunity to grow.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's something, another part of some conversations that I've had a lot lately, is there are so many people that are just so afraid to say something that's going to offend somebody else. And so they just don't say anything. And that is just so inhibiting because, growth lies just outside of our comfort zone. So, recognizing that that's coming from a positive place of intent, and being open to, and really relying on that other person to call you in instead of calling you out, calling you in. And, this is, you said this, and I think this is what you meant, but that's not how it came across. So maybe think about that, and just being open to that. And like you said, realizing the impact that that has, regardless of the intent. So that, because, and I say this almost every conversation that I have, we cannot do better if we don't know better. So without, taking that step outside of our comfort zone, we're not going to know any better, and we're not going to be able to do any better. So
Right.
that's really, I love that intention and impact portion as well. So with that, and you kind of you did address this already. Is there anything else that we can, because I think it's important to note too, um, and of course, I say this as a white woman, even though there are people of color and other historically underrepresented groups, people that represent those in the DEI space.
Mhm.
We want to avoid tokenizing people.
Yeah.
So I just want to note for those that are watching, it is important to, you can ask questions, but it's also important to not burden others and tokenize others with the expectation of them to educate you. So it is important to do that self-education. So with that being said, is there anything else that you would add, or is there anything that you need to call me in on? Because I'm always learning, and I'm coming from, again, a white perspective on this, but with the especially around conversations about race, because I think that's such an elephant in the room for so many people, and there's just not a great way to approach that. How would you if you haven't mentioned that already, how would you suggest others kind of broach that topic? Because again, I think a lot of people just kind of tiptoe around it if they even talk about it at all. And then with that also, what do you have any other insights or comments on what to do for our self-education?
Yeah. Yeah, I will start just by saying like I'm one brown lady like and who has lived in this like I'm an expert on Leslie D. Blakely. And so there are other folks, even other Black women in the DEI space that I'm constantly learning from. Even though like we share those identity markers, I think it's also important to remember that people are individuals, and that just because I've had this like one experience doesn't mean that somebody who share those same identity markers may have that same experience.
Right.
And so yeah, so like that you don't take just my experience as gospel, right? Like there are 8 billion people on this planet,
Mhm.
and a lot of them look like me, right? But nobody walks my life but me. And so be present with the person that you're with and like learning and growing together in that regard,
Mhm.
and know that that experience may differ like if you ask somebody the same set of questions. So yeah, I think that danger of like tokenization can be tricky, especially if you have limited um, exposure.
Mhm.
And so again, that's why I love the internet.
Mhm.
I think there are a couple of resources that I want to mention, and I'm going to butcher the names of these book titles, but again, if you Google like close enough, they'll pop up.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of really, really great books written by white people and people of color about how to talk about race.
Mhm.
Like sometimes it's I don't like I know that this is a thing and like slavery and it can be overwhelming, right? And so sometimes like instead of like launching into a particular topic, it may be a good place to start around that meta topic. And so um, I think that like there's a book, I think it's called like How to Not Be Stupid When You Talk About Race, or it's something about stupid and talking about race.
Yes.
It's super accessible, and she's really funny. I recommend that one. If you're particularly like not want if you're feeling nervous, I guess, about um, hearing from like somebody whose identity is different from you, then start with somebody who like you share an identity with. So like
Mhm.
Robin DiAngelo talks a lot about being a white woman in this space and things that white folks do
Mhm.
that can inhibit DEI efforts and how we can go about doing things better. Um, and then but I also think it's important to challenge some of the notions that we have, and so like yeah, dive into an author or somebody that you don't know, start with a biography and like learn about them personally, because that might open your ideas to like larger isms and issues. Um, and so yeah, go again if you're a history nerd, go historical. And so historical figures around,
Mhm.
I don't know, like architecture, and you can learn about the black man who invented the stoplight, like
Mhm.
or you're if you're like curious about hair, like Madam C.J. Walker, or or like Michelle Obama, like how do her arms get to be that way? I want to know that, right? Like,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, and so yeah, like, or again, something you see on TV or Twitter or whatever. I think just being curious is always great. I don't think we should get all of our stories from or all of our life lessons from entertainment, but that can also be an easy way to get in to different things and explore different topics and ideas. Um, just to again start a conversation. Like I think what's important in that piece of advice is to always remember that, like, unless it's a documentary, that it is for entertainment.
Mhm.
Um, and again, it's a story, it's not the story,
Right.
but it can be a really great gateway to having a lot of different conversations.
Mhm.
And then I think I'm like the female version of Napoleon Dynamite. Like I embrace the fact that I am super awkward. Um, and I think that it like if you're wanting to have these conversations, like name it, right? Like you can't name, you have to name the thing in order to navigate the thing.
Mhm.
And if you're just like, hey, I heard something the other day, or I have a question, and this may come off super random or really awkward, and I don't mean it that way, but and then like launching
Mhm.
in again, if you give somebody a heads up
Mhm.
about
Yeah.
kind of where you're coming from,
Yeah.
it can sort of soften that blow. And I hang on to that humility that like they may not want to answer it, or
Mhm.
because they're having a bad day, or you may be like the ninth person that's asked them that question or whatever. And that's not about you. Like again, you have to
Mhm.
appreciate individuals for who they are.
Mhm.
Um, and and yeah, like I was gonna go somewhere with that. I apologize. My mind just
It's
went blank.
okay.
But yeah, I think that um I'm always, always, always just gonna push like building trust,
Mhm.
having relationships, to have those conversations,
Mhm.
and like learn, learn, learn. There's a book, a movie, an article, a podcast. Like there is something that will appeal to you,
Mhm.
and spark some curiosity that will
Mhm.
help you to learn more about you and to learn more about others.
Mhm.
Oh, and then one last thing. Uh, I don't think we spend enough time as individuals asking ourselves tough questions, right? Like we put learning out there on other folks of, I
Mhm.
want to learn, this is that and the other thing, instead of like taking a step back and be like, why do I want to learn this?
Mhm.
What do I hope to get out of this conversation, or book, or movie, or experience, right?
Mhm.
I think the more self-reflective that we can be, and understanding what our intentions are, what we want our impact to be,
Mhm.
where we hope to go from here, it is really important, because you are an expert of you, right? Like you're the only
Mhm.
person in this whole world that's walked in your shoes every day for your whole
Mhm.
life. And so regularly checking in when you're with yourself when something really great happens, like, oh, I met this great person, and like, what did I love about it? What was it great? Why do I want to know more? Or
Mhm.
when you have like, somebody told you no, or you have a gruff
Mhm.
interaction or whatever, you're just like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Where does this come from? And
Mhm.
really like doing that self work is going to take
Mhm.
the like interpersonal work to a much deeper level than you could ever imagine.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, so Viola Davis is another one of the women that I just absolutely
Yes,
love, and I
she's an
listened.
EGOT. It's so
She
exciting.
did. So I actually listened to her book, and I love listening to biographies and books that are narrated by the authors. So that was just incredibly powerful, and I loved her before, and I love her even more after hearing her book. But some like her book changed my life, to be completely honest. That she talks about I think in the very beginning of the book about. But she and Will Smith were on, I don't remember what movie it was, but they were on set together and he asked who she was and she's like, what do you mean, who am I? I'm Viola. He's like, no, I'm always going to be that 15-year-old kid that a girlfriend just broke up with. Like, who are you? And she's like, oh my gosh. And that just was so profound because that's I think that's can resonate with a lot of people that we had a set of experiences or one experience that just has impacted the way that we move through the world. And so you and I are both IDI administrators for the Intercultural Development Inventory, and I actually just got done. I'm actually still working through debriefs with our 2023 DEI council members, but that tool has been so impactful for me personally also, and I know some of the other council members from last year that have gone through the development plan and just really analyzing, our background and our roots and how the communities that we come from have just completely shaped how we operate in the world and how those biases have come to be and what those biases are. And like you said, to name the thing so that we can navigate the thing. And so that tool has been very helpful for us to navigate that also. Yeah. So, what would your recommendations be for employers to be more inclusive and welcoming for Black students that are coming out of college or even high school and other Black employees that are already in the workforce?
Sure. I say you start at home. People in glass houses can't throw stones. And so really taking a good, long, hard look at your own environment. Because I think one of the fallacies around DEI work of like, oh, if we just bring in people, like more people who are different, like things will be better. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that might happen. But it also like, it's not sustainable, right? Like if you bring them in the door and then they have a miserable time while they're there, like you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
retain people, have you're not going to establish that trust to build relationships. And so I think just step zero, really, not even step one, but step zero is, again, asking those questions of why do we want to do this? What are our goals? Where is this coming from? But I think a key question to also ask is how do we want folks that are different from ourselves in whatever way, race, class, gender, ability,
Mm-hmm.
sexuality, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
how do we want them to feel? And how
Mm-hmm.
do we want them to show up? And what are ways in which we foster their ability to show up as who they are? And what are the ways in which we foster ways that they have to hide who they are or change who they are in order to be a part? Um, and really spending, a bulk of your time on that piece. And
Mm-hmm.
then like once you've done that assessment and started doing that work internally, having, again, having conversations, networking, looking at other organizations, companies, just individuals who have had positive experiences and pick their brains. Like, hey, what did you do that you liked? Um, what did you do that helped? What did you read? Who did you listen to? What documents like I can speak for me, but I
Mm-hmm.
also, in my experience with other DEI professionals, we love sharing stuff like
Mm-hmm.
resources and, oh yeah, let me send you that checklist, or oh, you should
Mm-hmm.
read this book. Again, I'll butcher it, but I'll be like, if you just like put those words in a Google search, it'll pop up.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, folks, especially in the inclusion space, want to include more people, right? And so uh, going and asking those questions and sharing resources with one another, I think it is great. And also just and regularly checking in so it doesn't always feel transactional. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you've done the work and you know kind of the areas that you want to shore up so that your DEI efforts can be more robust and more sustainable, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's also important to check in with your folks again across identity spectra to see like, hey, are the things that we're doing, are they working? Are they not working? Again, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like
Mm-hmm.
so that you continually assess.
Mm-hmm.
I'm often saying that like DEI isn't like, oh, like we did DEI and we're done. Like it's life work.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this for 15 plus years, and I feel like in a lot of ways I'm still a baby in the industry and in the field. Still learning things, especially because the world is just changing so rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as things change and as those conversations evolved and tactics and this that and the other thing, like we have to remember to remain nimble and that this work is continuous.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that growth mindset and having that expansion mindset as your foundation, I think is also really key.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So as we wrap up to end on a little bit of a lighter note, of course, in the DEI space, it's very emotionally and can be physically taxing. I'm sure as an educator, you experience that as well. And I
Oh yeah.
know in healthcare, we experience that as that level as well. So, what does self-care look like for you? And how do you carve out time to make sure that you're able to take care of yourself?
Sure. I think first and foremost, like I center joy in everything I do. Um, I think there are those memes on the internet, Black boy joy or Black girl magic, and you know I aim to live that. There are a whole lot of people that didn't have the opportunity to wake up this morning, and I did. So that's a good place to start my day. And so
Mhm.
um, I try to keep that mindset, I mean, especially when things are tough,
Mhm.
of like, and if that's the bar, right? Like, hey, I'm alive. I might feel like garbage, but I'm alive.
Mhm.
Like, put it in the win column. So,
Right.
for me, like, I try to center joy in everything I do. In the most elaborate sense, again, put me on a plane and let me go and explore and
Yeah.
experience something new.
Yeah.
That always recharges me. I got to go somewhere at least. I told my husband, I was like, we got to get on a plane at least once a quarter. And even if we don't leave the country, like
Mhm.
let's go explore Denver or let's go to
Mhm.
Albuquerque or let's go to Charleston or something like
Mhm.
travel definitely recharges my batteries. Just breathing new air, eating new food, trying new
Yes.
things is just really exciting. I love a good book. Again, I'll butcher the title, but I'll be able to tell you all about it.
Yeah.
And I love, again, I'm a history buff, so like I read a lot of nonfiction, but like I'm a sucker for a good like escapist like romance novel. Like give me the Hallmark movie in page form.
Yeah.
I'm good. Like just to
Yeah.
like dissociate and be like, oh, like wow, I walked into the Walmart and my high school crush that I haven't seen in 20, like I'm a sucker for that. Give me that any day. Um, but my son is a source of joy for me as well. And just like being in good community. Like I have people that I can just shoulders to cry on, that like when things are just like real rough.
Mhm.
And those same people are the people I'm like, okay, I need you to tell me the truth. Like
Mhm.
I don't tell me what I want to hear. I need you to tell me the truth.
Mhm.
And those people are also the ones that are my biggest cheerleaders and will celebrate my
Mhm.
biggest wins. And so
Mhm.
I'm really blessed and fortunate to have them as well. But yeah, I think centering joy in everything I do, hopping on a plane at least once every 3 months, and really cherishing my people and my circle
Mhm.
is what keeps me going.
Yeah, that's good. Good. So, I don't have anything else for you. Is there, I'm gonna do the yoga thing. Is there anything that we haven't talked about or haven't mentioned that you want to make sure that everybody knows?
Yeah, I one just thank you so much. Like I'm humbled and honored that
Yes.
you would want to like even talk to me and like pick my brain. Like
Oh gosh,
again,
yes.
I in a lot of ways, like I mean I know a lot of stuff. I have degrees and things on the wall, but
Right.
I still feel like I'm a baby in this, and just I've just really enjoyed getting to know you, Ashton, and being
Yes.
wanting to be thoughtful about questions I ask, but then the answers that I give. And so I just want to say thank you for the opportunity and
Yes.
uh, and it's a corny adage, but I think if if more folks took this attitude as they were having conversations about difference, I think it would make a world of difference. And that is any opportunity that you can be the bright spot in somebody's day, take it. And so that can be as simple as just saying hello, giving them a wave, um, paying them a compliment, giving them a hug, like whatever. I mean, with consent, right? Like just like any opportunity, any opportunity to be the bright spot in somebody's day, take it because you'll feel better and they'll feel better. Um, and I think that that is something that translates across culture, race, creed, religion, all of it. And so if you don't know where to start, start there. And
Mhm.
I think that the world will be a much better place to work.
Yes, excellent. Well, Leslie, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today and to answer my questions and let me pick your brain. I really, really appreciate it.
Sure.
It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and I'm sure we will talk soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.